The howling winter wind of 1873 cut through Darcy Valentine's threadbare shawl like it wasn't even there, her 7-month pregnant belly offering no protection against the cruel Montana Territory night. Her husband's final words still rang in her ears, colder than the snowflakes now stinging her tear-streaked face. "No wife of mine will birth another man's bastard. Get out." She stumbled forward, one hand pressed against her swollen abdomen, the other clutching a small cloth bundle containing everything she'd managed to grab. The snow was falling faster now, erasing her footprints almost as quickly as she made them. The nearest town was 15 miles away, an impossible journey in her condition, and in this weather. Darcy's breath came in ragged puffs of white vapor as she pushed onward. She'd been a fool to marry Thomas Valentine, a man who'd seemed kind enough at first, but had revealed his true nature after their wedding 6 months ago. A man who refused to believe her when she told him she'd already been with child when they wed, a secret shame she'd hidden from everyone. "It'll be all right, little one," she whispered to her unborn child, though her voice was lost in the howling wind. "We'll find shelter." But as darkness fell completely and the temperature plummeted further, Darcy began to lose hope. Her fingers had gone numb and her legs felt heavy as lead. When she finally spotted a faint golden light in the distance, she wondered if it was real or if her mind was playing cruel tricks on her. Zachary Stone wasn't a man who expected company, especially not on a night like this. His small cabin sat a good 5 miles from the nearest neighbor, just the way he liked it. After years of driving cattle across the open range, he'd earned enough to buy this modest piece of land and a small herd of his own. He was stoking his fire when he heard what sounded like a faint knocking. Frowning, he grabbed his rifle, force of habit in these parts, and cautiously approached the door. "Who's there?" he called out. When no answer came, he hesitated, then unlatched the door. The wind nearly tore it from his grasp as he pulled it open, and there, illuminated by the cabin's warm glow, stood a woman, a pregnant woman, her face alarmingly pale, her lips tinged blue. "Help," was all she managed before her eyes rolled back and she collapsed forward. Zachary dropped his rifle and caught her before she hit the ground, startled by how cold she felt even through her clothing. Without hesitation, he carried her inside, kicking the door shut behind him. "Madam, madam, can you hear me?" he said, laying her gently on his bed. He grabbed the thick buffalo hide blanket he'd traded for last winter and wrapped it around her shivering form. Darcy's eyelids fluttered. "My baby," she whispered. "Please, my baby." "You're both safe now," Zachary assured her, though he had no idea if that was true. He'd never delivered a baby, much less saved a half-frozen pregnant woman. But he knew enough about surviving harsh winters to understand she needed warmth fast. He built up the fire until it was roaring, then returned to her side. Her clothes were damp with melted snow, and he realized with alarm that she needed to get out of them. "Madam, I'm sorry, but I need to remove your wet things. You'll catch your death otherwise." He hesitated, his weathered face showing his discomfort. "I'll be respectful, I swear it." When she gave a faint nod, he worked quickly, keeping his eyes averted as much as possible while he helped her into one of his clean flannel shirts, large enough to serve as a nightgown on her small frame. Then he wrapped her again in the buffalo hide. "Still not enough," he muttered, seeing her continued shivering. Making a decision, he climbed onto the bed and, sitting up against the headboard, pulled her into his arms, blanket and all. "Body heat," he explained gruffly, though she seemed barely conscious. "Best way to warm up." As he held her close, he could feel her rounded belly pressed against him, and the realization of what he was holding, not just one life but two, hit him with unexpected force. He'd never been one for families or settling down, but something about this woman's vulnerability and courage stirred protective instincts he hadn't known he possessed. Hours passed as Zachary held Darcy, her shivering gradually subsiding as warmth returned to her body. Outside, the blizzard raged on, but inside the cabin, a tentative safety had been established. When Darcy finally woke fully, confusion filled her eyes before memory returned. "The baby?" she asked immediately, her hands going to her belly. "Seems fine. You've been moving in your sleep." "That's good, right?" Zachary said, awkwardly extracting himself from their embrace now that she was awake. She nodded, pulling the blanket tighter around herself. "Thank you, you saved our lives." "Any decent man would have done the same," he replied, moving to the stove. "Can you eat something?" "I've got stew," Darcy nodded gratefully. "I'm Darcy Valentine." "Zachary Stone," he replied, ladling stew into a bowl. "Most folks just call me Zach." "How did I get here, Mr. Stone? Last I remember, I was walking through the snow and then you showed up at my door and collapsed." "Mind telling me what a woman in your condition was doing out in a blizzard?" Darcy looked down, shame coloring her cheeks. "My husband. He threw me out when he realized the child wasn't his." Zachary's jaw tightened. "He threw you out, in this weather, knowing you're carrying." "He said he wouldn't raise another man's bastard," she whispered. Zachary muttered something under his breath that sounded like a curse. "Well, you can stay here until the storm passes, then I'll take you to town." "I have nowhere to go in town," Darcy admitted. Zachary handed her the bowl of stew, considering her words. "We'll figure something out. For now, just rest and get your strength back." The blizzard continued for 3 days, trapping them together in the small cabin. At first, they moved awkwardly around each other, Zachary sleeping on a pallet by the fire while Darcy took his bed. But as hours turned to days, a cautious familiarity developed between them. Darcy learned that Zachary had been a cowboy most of his life, driving herds up from Texas, before saving enough to stake his own claim. He'd fought briefly in the war, returned with a slight limp from a bullet to his thigh, and had been mostly alone since. Zachary discovered that Darcy had grown up in Boston, the daughter of a merchant who'd lost everything in a bad investment. She'd come west as a schoolteacher, only to find the position filled when she arrived. Desperate and alone, she'd made poor choices that led to her current predicament. "The baby's father?" Zachary asked on the second night as they sat by the fire. "A man passing through town. He promised marriage, then disappeared the next morning," Darcy said quietly. "I was naive and foolish. And Valentine, a widower who needed a wife. I needed security, I thought." She sighed. "I thought I could hide my condition long enough that he'd believe the baby was his, but I started showing too soon." Zachary nodded, passing no judgment. "Men like Valentine give the rest of us a bad name." On the morning of the 4th day, the storm finally broke. Sunshine sparkled off the pristine snow, nearly blinding in its intensity. Zachary saddled his horse, intending to ride into town for supplies and to ask about options for Darcy. "I won't be gone more than a few hours," he promised. "Bar the door behind me." When he returned that afternoon, his expression was grim. "Your husband's been telling stories around town," he said as he unpacked the supplies. "Says you ran off with another man, says you stole from him." Darcy's face fell. "That's not true, I know that," Zachary assured her. "But it means going to town might not be safe for you right now. Folks take sides in situations like this, and Valentine's been established there longer than you have." "What am I going to do?" Darcy whispered, her hand instinctively going to her belly. Zachary set down the last of the supplies and turned to face her. "Stay here." "Here? But I couldn't impose, it's not an imposition. I've got the space and you need somewhere safe until the baby comes." He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of his discomfort. "After that, you can decide what you want to do." Darcy stared at him, searching his face for any sign of ulterior motives, but found only honest concern. "Why would you do this for me?" "You don't even know me." "I know enough," he said simply. "I know you've got courage walking through that storm to save your child. I know you've been dealt a bad hand and deserve better. And I know I couldn't live with myself if I sent you away with nowhere to go." Tears welled in Darcy's eyes. "Thank you, Zachary. I'll earn my keep, I promise." "I don't doubt it," he said with a small smile. The weeks that followed established a routine between them. Zachary tended his small herd of cattle and repaired things around the homestead, while Darcy kept the cabin, cooked, and slowly added feminine touches to the Spartan interior. A quilt here, curtains there, wildflowers in a jar on the table when spring began to show its first signs. Despite her advanced pregnancy, Darcy insisted on contributing. She turned out to be a decent shot, occasionally bringing down rabbits for the pot. She mended Zachary's worn clothing with neat, precise stitches. And in the evenings, she read aloud from one of the few books Zachary owned, her voice giving life to stories he'd never found time to read himself. For his part, Zachary found himself looking forward to returning to the cabin each day. The sight of smoke curling from the chimney, the smell of fresh bread, the sound of Darcy humming as she worked it all created a sense of home he'd never known in his 32 years. One evening in late April, as they sat by the fire, Darcy suddenly gasped and pressed a hand to her side. "What is it?" Zachary asked. Immediately alert, Darcy took his hand and placed it on her belly. "Feel." Beneath his palm, Zachary felt a strong kick, then another. His eyes widened, meeting Darcy's gaze. "That's something," he said, a rare smile spreading across his weathered features. "He or she is getting stronger every day," Darcy said proudly. Then her expression grew serious. "Zachary, I need to ask you something. Anything, when the baby comes, will you help me?" "There's no midwife close enough, and I'm afraid I'll help you," he promised without hesitation, though the thought terrified him. "We'll figure it out together." As May turned to June, Darcy's time grew near. Zachary made several trips to town, returning with supplies they might need for the birth, based on advice from the shopkeeper's wife. He also brought disturbing news. "Valentine's been asking questions. Someone must have seen me buying baby things." Darcy paled. "Do you think he'll come here?" "I don't know," Zachary admitted. "But if he does, he'll find he's not welcome." The first pains came on a warm night in mid-June. Darcy had been sleeping when she woke with a startled cry. Zachary was at her side in an instant. "It's time," she said, her voice tight with pain and fear. What followed were 18 hours of the most terrifying, exhausting, and ultimately miraculous experience of Zachary's life. He boiled water, prepared clean cloths, and supported Darcy through each contraction, letting her squeeze his hand until he lost feeling in his fingers. "You're doing great," he encouraged her, wiping sweat from her brow. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known, Darcy Valentine." When she began to push, Zachary positioned himself to catch the baby, praying silently that he wouldn't make a mistake. And then, suddenly, there it was, a tiny, red-faced infant slipping into his waiting hands, announcing its arrival with a lusty cry. "A girl," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he quickly wiped the baby clean and placed her on Darcy's chest. "You have a daughter." Darcy wept as she cradled her child, counting fingers and toes through her tears. "She's perfect, just perfect." Zachary cleaned up as best he could, then sat beside them on the bed, watching in wonder as the newborn nuzzled against her mother. "What will you name her?" he asked softly. Darcy looked up at him, her face radiant despite her exhaustion. Emma Grace." "It's beautiful," Zachary said, gently touching the baby's tiny hand. To his surprise, she gripped his finger with surprising strength. "She's got a good hold." "She knows who helped bring her into this world," Darcy said, her eyes meeting his. "Zachary, I don't know how to thank you." "No need for thanks. Having you both here has been." He struggled for words. "It's been the best time of my life." The admission hung between them, heavy with meaning neither was quite ready to address. Instead, Zachary simply stayed beside them, a newfound family he'd never expected but now couldn't imagine living without. The weeks following Emma's birth were a blur of sleepless nights and joyful discoveries. Zachary found himself falling in love with the tiny girl, her determined expressions, her surprising strength, the way she seemed to study everything with curious eyes, and he found himself falling for her mother as well. It happened gradually, then all at once the realization that Darcy Valentine had become essential to him. It wasn't just her practical contributions to their shared life, but the way she listened when he spoke, the gentle touch of her hand on his arm, the sound of her laughter filling spaces in his heart he hadn't known were empty. One evening, as Emma slept peacefully in the cradle Zachary had built, Darcy joined him on the porch where he sat watching the sunset. "I should be planning what comes next," she said quietly. "Emma's strong enough to travel now." Zachary felt his heart constrict at her words. "Where would you go?" "I don't know, perhaps back east. I could find work as a teacher again." "Or you could stay," he said, the words escaping before he could consider them fully. Darcy turned to look at him, her expression unreadable in the fading light. "Stay as what, Zachary? Your housekeeper?" "No," he said firmly, turning to face her. "Not as my housekeeper." Understanding dawned in her eyes, followed quickly by uncertainty. "Zachary, I'm a married woman with another man's child. Valentine threw you out, left you to die in the cold. In the eyes of God and any decent man, that marriage is over." He took her hand in his. "As for Emma, I've held her every day of her life. I was the first to touch her, to hear her cry. If that doesn't make her mine in all the ways that matter, I don't know what would." Tears filled Darcy's eyes. "You can't mean I do mean it. I love you, Darcy, both of you. I want you to stay, not as my housekeeper or my guest, but as my wife, if you'll have me." Darcy's free hand went to her mouth, tears now flowing freely. "Oh, Zachary, I've been afraid to hope, afraid to believe this could be real." "It's real," he assured her, reaching up to wipe away her tears. "I may not have much to offer, but everything I have is yours, including my heart." "Yes," she whispered, leaning into his touch. "Yes, I'll stay. Yes, I'll be your wife." Their first kiss was tentative, sweet, and full of promise. When they parted, Zachary rested his forehead against hers. "We'll need to sort things out legally with Valentine," he said. "I want to do this right." "He won't make it easy," Darcy warned. "Nothing worth having ever comes easy," Zachary replied with determination. 2 days later, as Darcy hung laundry while Emma napped, the sound of approaching horses broke the peaceful afternoon. Zachary was in the barn but emerged quickly, rifle in hand, as 3 riders appeared. Thomas Valentine led the group, his face twisted with anger as he dismounted. The 2 men with him remained on horseback, hands hovering near their guns. "So it's true," Valentine sneered, looking at Darcy. "You ran straight to another man's bed." "That's not what happened, Thomas," Darcy said, backing toward the cabin where Emma slept. "I've come for what's mine," Valentine declared. "You stole money when you left." "I took nothing but what I came with," Darcy replied, her voice surprisingly steady. Zachary stepped forward, positioning himself between Darcy and Valentine. "You threw her out in a blizzard. She nearly died on my doorstep. Whatever claim you thought you had on her ended that night." Valentine's hand moved to his gun. "This isn't your concern, Stone." "It became my concern when I saved her life," Zachary replied evenly. "It became my concern when I helped deliver her child. And it became my concern when I asked her to be my wife." Valentine's face reddened with rage. "She's already married." "Not for long," Zachary countered. "We're filing papers in town tomorrow. Abandonment is grounds for divorce in this territory." "You think any judge will take the word of a whore over mine? I'm a respected businessman." Zachary's grip tightened on his rifle. "Careful how you speak about my future wife, Valentine." From inside the cabin, Emma began to cry. Darcy glanced anxiously toward the door. "Go to her," Zachary said softly. "I'll handle this." As Darcy hurried inside, Valentine took another step forward. "I'm not leaving without compensation for what she took from me. You'll leave with your life. That's compensation enough," Zachary said coldly. "Now get off my property." For a tense moment, it seemed Valentine might draw his gun, but something in Zachary's eyes, the calm certainty of a man who would not back down, made him hesitate. "This isn't over," Valentine warned, backing toward his horse. "Yes, it is," Zachary replied. "You won't come here again. You won't speak to her or about her. In return, we won't press charges for attempted murder. Leaving a pregnant woman to die in a blizzard would interest the sheriff, I think." Valentine's companions exchanged uncomfortable glances. Clearly, they hadn't heard that part of the story. "Let's go, Tom," one of them said. "This ain't worth it." With a final venomous glare, Valentine mounted his horse and rode away, his companions following closely behind. Zachary watched until they disappeared from sight, then hurried into the cabin. Darcy stood by the window, Emma clutched to her chest. "Are they gone?" she asked, her voice trembling. "They're gone," Zachary assured her, setting his rifle aside and joining them, "and they won't be back." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I know men like Valentine. They're bullies, and bullies back down when someone stands up to them." He wrapped his arms around both of them. "Besides, he knows I'd do anything to protect you." Emma, calmed by her mother's heartbeat and Zachary's presence, cooed softly between them. "We're still going to town tomorrow," Zachary said. "We'll file those papers and make it official. No one will ever separate us." The following day they made the journey to town, Emma bundled securely against Darcy's chest. The trip took longer than usual, with Zachary insisting on frequent stops to ensure Darcy and Emma were comfortable. At the county clerk's office, they filed the necessary paperwork to begin divorce proceedings, citing abandonment and cruelty. The clerk, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, raised his eyebrows when he saw Darcy with the baby, but said nothing. "It will take time," he warned them, "and Mr. Valentine may contest it." "Let him try," Zachary said confidently. "We have witnesses who saw him turn her out in the blizzard." As they left the clerk's office, Darcy squeezed Zachary's hand. "What now?" "Now," he said with a smile, "we see the preacher and arrange for a wedding. As soon as the divorce is final, we'll make honest folk of ourselves." The months that followed were not without challenges. Valentine did contest the divorce, but when faced with testimonies from neighbors who had seen him force Darcy out during the storm, his case weakened considerably. The judge, a practical man with little patience for such cruelty, granted the divorce by year's end. 2 weeks later, on a crisp January morning in 1874, almost exactly 1 year after Zachary had found Darcy at his door, they stood before the preacher in the small church in town. Emma, now 7 months old and full of energy, watched from the arms of the shopkeeper's wife who had agreed to stand as witness. "Do you, Zachary Stone, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the preacher asked. Zachary looked at Darcy, remembering the half-frozen woman he'd wrapped in his buffalo hide blanket, the courage she'd shown in childbirth, the countless moments of joy they'd shared since. "I do," he said, his voice unwavering. "And do you, Darcy Valentine, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Darcy smiled up at him, her eyes reflecting the love that had grown between them. "I do." "Then, by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." As their lips met, sealing their vows, Emma let out a delighted squeal, causing everyone present to laugh. Zachary broke the kiss to look at their daughter, then back at his new wife. "Mrs. Stone," he said, testing the name. "Mr. Stone," she replied with a radiant smile. They retrieved Emma, thanked their witnesses, and headed home, a family bound not by blood but by choice, by courage, and by love that had bloomed in the most unexpected circumstances. 5 years later, the Stone Ranch had prospered. What had once been a small homestead with a few cattle had grown into a respectable operation. The cabin had been expanded to a proper house with 3 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a covered porch where the family often gathered in the evenings. Emma, now a spirited 5-year-old with her mother's auburn hair and a determination all her own, had been joined by a 3-year-old brother, Samuel, and a new baby sister, Lucy, just 6 months old. On a warm summer evening, as the children played in the yard under Darcy's watchful eye, Zachary paused in his work to watch his family. Emma was teaching Samuel how to lasso, using a small rope Zachary had made for her, while Lucy cooed from the blanket spread on the grass beside Darcy. Laying down his tools, Zachary joined them, settling beside his wife and picking up Lucy, who gurgled happily at the sight of her father. "You're finished early," Darcy observed, leaning over to kiss his cheek. Some things are more important than fence posts, he replied, putting his free arm around her shoulders. I was just thinking about how lucky I am. We're the lucky ones, Darcy said softly, if you hadn't opened your door that night. But I did, he reminded her. And I found everything I never knew I wanted. Emma abandoned her lasso lesson and ran to them, flinging herself into Zachary's lap beside the baby. Papa, I almost got it right that time, I saw, he said proudly. You'll be out-ropping me in no time. Samuel toddled over as well, not wanting to be left out, and squeezed himself between his parents. As the sun began to set over their land, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Zachary looked at the family he'd found, or perhaps the family that had found him. From a half-frozen woman on his doorstep to this moment of perfect contentment, their journey had not been easy, but it had led them exactly where they were meant to be. I love you, he whispered to Darcy over the children's heads. And I love you, she replied, her eyes reflecting the same wonder he felt at their shared life. Every day more than the last. In that moment, surrounded by the love he'd never expected to find, Zachary Stone knew with absolute certainty that sometimes the greatest adventures weren't found on the open range or in the wild territories, but in opening your door and your heart to possibility.